Okay, welcome back to the Rail Cybersecurity USA conference. We are pleased to be back with several leaders within the industry for a panel session this afternoon on cybersecurity maturity for the North American market. And I hope that you all had a relaxing time, an opportunity to visit the technology showcase, as well as an opportunity to possibly get up and have a break and maybe something to snack on. Do remember to take periodic breaks. I also wanted to mention that we do have a networking function to the left-hand side of the screen. So periodically throughout the event, if you wanted to click on that, a lot of people enjoy it as a fun networking function. It will pair you with the next random person at the conference. So you won't know who you're meeting, but I think that's the joy of it. Is it does pair you up with the next person in line. So you might want to try that while you're here for the next 2 days. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off with our next panel session. And this panel session, as I said, is on cyber maturity for the North American rail market. We are joined by Franco Cappa, cybersecurity advisor for CISA, Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. Kyle Malo, the Senior Director of Cybersecurity and Chief Information Security Officer for Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority. Jonathan Lamb, Supervisory Transportation Security Specialist and Section Chief with the TSA, as well as Mickey Schiffman, the CTO and co-founder of Silas. So without further ado, if you gentlemen would please make your way to the stage, we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good evening, James, in our side.
Yes, good evening. Good evening on your side. It's 4 o'clock in the United Kingdom, and what is it? What time is it there then? It's what, 11, I think?
Yep, 11:02.
Awesome. I keep getting my times mixed up. It's a challenge of modern day conferencing online. So fantastic. Thank you for joining us. And thank you, Mr. Cappa and Mr. Lamb, for presenting this morning. A lot of great information there. For all of the attendees who are watching, by all means, put your questions into the event chat to the right, and I will address the questions as we progress through this panel. If I start getting overwhelmed with questions, I might have to stop and formulate a different strategy. But otherwise, I will present those questions to our panelists as we go. This is about cyber maturity for the North American market. So I'm just going to go ahead and start off with you, Mr. Cappa. Are rail organizations progressing in measuring and assessing their strengths and weaknesses in a day-to-day strategic operation from CISA's perspective?
Sure, great question. Actually, interesting enough, the transportation sector is starting getting more, I guess, overall interest, because as I should say this morning, pretty much it interconnects all the different sectors. So I guess there is an understanding that of the prevalence and also the need, let's say, to take, I guess, a better look at the sector as a whole, and also specific, to the railway systems and so on and so forth. So from a CISA perspective, we are part of what we do. It's through the assessments we get a little bit of understanding about where we are, and I wish I could say we are doing great. That's probably it would be not an accurate statement there, but definitely I see there is more interest in a sense that from both, let's say, organizations involved, so partners that we work with, and in general, more understanding that we need to take it more seriously, I guess, than what we did in the past. And especially, what it is, let's say, it's becoming more of interest, especially in the transportation sector, is the OT side. So your SCADA type systems, because that's where you can get, some pretty, big impact, if you will, if something happens. So I guess the short answer is that we are in the process of, through also our our risk management function, understanding more, let's say, where we are, how mature we are, but we are definitely progressing in the sense that we are working with the sector more or heavily than we did in the past. And you're probably on mute.
I thought I was talking. That's the great thing about these virtual environments. I see my mouth moving, but nothing's coming out. Kyle, can you also comment from an operator's perspective on how rail organizations are progressing in measuring and assessing their strengths and weaknesses?
Yeah, I think a lot of organizations have taken advantage of maturity modeling, maturity assessing, certainly over the last 10, 20 years. I think the transportation is catching up. To my peer's point, there are now services out there that CISA and DHS provide for the United States where you can get that kind of independent assessment done to kind of figure out where your organization really sits. But there's also paid services now that I think are really advantageous for organizations because it gives you a lot of insight into how well you're doing, or quite frankly, where your major gaps are in security, and the ability to look across, as was pointed out, to be able to look across at SCADA, industrial control systems, how our OT is being secured is a challenge because a lot of the models still are focused on traditional cybersecurity practices, business networks, and infrastructure. And thankfully, though, there's a lot of models you can kind of plug in. There's a lot of frameworks you can plug in that I think that help you as you're gauging how well you're doing as an organization. For us, we've done both, right? At Metro here in DC, we have taken advantage of DHS's free survey. They came in about a year and a half ago, spotlighted a lot of the gaps we have. And I think there's a lot of communication. I think there's a good question because I think there's still a lot of education and communication to reach the rest of our peers in this sector, though, if they're going to take advantage of a lot of the services. Private sector, too, is offering these kind of assessments and tools right now. We just purchased one. I won't pitch the vendor, but for really a low cost, to be honest, in terms of overall budget, we're talking, $50,000 or $60,000 to buy a piece of technology and get an initial assessment done that you can then plug in your own data and keep an ongoing maturity. I think that's the other big component of this, especially as we're trying to communicate risk to our executive leadership teams, to our boards of directors. Having an independent maturity assessment, I think, goes a long way towards saying, hey, we're under-resourced, which is, I think, where most of my peers are. We're under-resourced when it comes to cybersecurity. And I think this is a great mechanism that transcends what your background is, right? Because our boards may not know cybersecurity very well, but they do understand maturity assessment. So I think there's a lot of advantages right now to kind of pushing this kind of service, whether it's something you take advantage of that's free or that's something that you invest in.
Thank you. Mickey, from the vendor perspective or Silas perspective, can you comment, please?
Yes, so thank you, James. So I completely agree with the points of the peers in the panel here. What we see here is, just to summarize and add another small perspective, what we see here is maturity is growing, originating from the IT environment and traditional risk assessment models to OT environment and the operational assets of the organizations. So what we're seeing is that we're seeing more and more companies that have done some sort of risk assessment, penetration testing, started to touch the operational elements of their network, started to uncover what is behind all those safety sins and all the critical elements, and understand what is the security posture. And once companies do that, and we see lots of companies doing that in the US, both in the we see it in the freight market, in the mass transit market, in suburban companies, etc. And once those companies starting to do that, they can actually establish a good cybersecurity case, understand what is the current posture and what are the vulnerabilities, and starts also implementing controls in order to mitigate the risks. So that's the process that we're seeing, starting from IT and continuing to OT, but also starting from risk assessment and then going to the implementation stages.
Thank you, Mickey. Jonathan, can you comment?
I think that we've seen a marked shift in the focus from cybersecurity issues, especially with the not really a rush, but a desire on the behalf of industry to obviously take advantage of all the new technologies that are available to streamline operations, to shorten supply chains, and to take advantage of all that technology offers. And so, industry has implemented in different places, whether it be for business reasons or regulatory reasons. They've adopted a lot of this technology, and now it's a matter of figuring out where the new vulnerabilities are, and as Kyle said, I mean, there's any number of different assessments you can use, and I know that Franco will probably tell you all the various acronyms used for any number of different assessments. But I think it's one of the first steps is, okay, we know that that we have vulnerabilities. We need to assess where they're at, so that both government and industry can focus resources in mitigating those. So get assessments, get them done, and I one of the things I was originally trained as a businessman, and for the most part, I think Kyle will back me up on this, is that operators and businesses see security as a cost center or as a cost hole, or whatever you want to call it, and what I'm seeing gratefully is a shift from seeing security as a cost center, as to seeing it more of as a preventative measure to stave off losses that would be greater than the investment in the security countermeasures, whether they be cyber or physical. So that's something that I've seen that I actually am grateful for.
Awesome. Now, that's interesting that you say that, because so to answer the question, are rail organizations progressing? We would collectively say yes, that we are progressing. There's obviously challenges there, OT being one of the biggest challenges. But it's interesting, Jonathan, that you say that, because is cybersecurity becoming a business enabler? We used to talk a lot about how security operations centers used to need to be pitched at the C-level. This was all pre-COVID. we talked about rail organizations out here in Europe, but really required security operations centers. But they needed to be pitched even in the nuclear sector as a business enabler, as opposed to a cost center. And once we were able to shift that perception, I think we saw a lot of asset owners get a lot more done. Would you agree that, team, that cyber is being seen more as a business enabler? Kyle, could you comment on that?
I think it would be generous to say that we're seeing that quite yet. I think we're on the cusp of it, and I think that a smart CISO does a couple of things to try to advocate for that. How you and in terms of how our I know we've got a lot of vendors, a lot of folks that are doing development of technology on these, that are watching this conference and participating, and certainly our partners in government. But we have to look at specific projects and initiatives that we have in cybersecurity and talk about how they enable business. A good example for us right now is we're doing role-based access control. We're implementing and doing a significant update around that. And what we're finding is that while there's a good security reason to do RBAC, behind the scenes, that process is automating account provisioning in a way that our organization hasn't seen before, which reduces administrative burden in all departments across the organization. So if we can talk like that, right, and if our peers can help us to frame those conversations, how are you securing while improving the business at the same time? I think those are really helpful points to make. The second thing I would say is how you're partnering. Most transit organizations have, I would assume everyone does, has a risk component to their organization. Somebody that tracks corporate risk, and predominantly safety is the primary thing that gets measured and tracked within a risk, with the chief risk officer or risk component of the organization. Getting cyber in there so that it gets that kind of spotlight with your executive leadership, I think, is another key thing that you can do to demonstrate that it is part of the larger organization's mission to deliver safe and reliable services out to your customers.
Thank you, Franco, and then Mickey. Could you also comment on that? Are we seeing this as a business enabler by chance?
Yeah, it's definitely a great point, right? And from a personal perspective, when I was a CISO, I strive actually to do that, right? Exactly doing that. And my comment was always, I'm not here to create Fort Knoxes, where I go, right? I'm here to understand the business, and that part sometimes it's maybe not really done properly, in a sense that the cyber functions are detached and not entirely don't have a good understanding, a grasp, let's say, of the business side, right? So that is something that security professionals have to, I guess, do better, and definitely I think also because of these, I mentioned this morning, the convergence between physical and cyber. So there's definitely a shift towards let's try to understand at the higher level, so visibility overall across the board, from a risk perspective, as Kyle was saying, and I completely agree, so that's the only way to really deal with security, right, from a risk perspective. And the risk doesn't necessarily have to be bad actors or whatever, right? It could be also from a business perspective. So that is also where you need to make sure that you address that properly. And again, sometimes we help with some of the facilitated assessments and capabilities that we have. We try to help in that respect as well. So try to also help organizations understanding where to, I guess, invest their money and all that. But so I guess a long answer to say, I think there is definitely a shift there, but I still believe that there is a better job that security professionals have to do, especially from security, because historically cybersecurity, it's been technologically driven. So there's a bit of a shift, and so understanding, again, looking at it from a different type of lenses, if you will, not just the technical aspect, but overall. So, and that goes, along with the risk factor. So that is what I think, we need to move as professionals. And I think, that's happening. And, it's going to take some time, but I think that's happening overall.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Franco. Mickey.
Yes. So to relate your question, I will break it down into two. So first, I think that cybersecurity is an enabler for many types of operations. For instance, if you introduce wireless communication to a train in 2021, you probably consider whether it's secure or not. Something that people wouldn't do 5 or 10 years ago, maybe, but now it's a mandatory requirement, and people will try to understand whether it's right or not to do that. The second part is, I think, somehow related to the nature of the railway industry, which is it's really a compliance-based industry. And as in compliance process, you usually try to tick different boxes, which is maybe good for safety, and because in safety you try to reduce the risk and not touch the system. But cybersecurity is quite dynamic, and I think one of the benefits of cybersecurity, in terms of the benefits as enabler to business operations, is that usually cybersecurity, the modern cybersecurity tools like our Silos One solution, is probably the most modern piece of software that you get inside your network. And part of the cybersecurity processes are also embedded into the operational processes, meaning, for example, companies that we introduce a solution to, before we come, they don't know which assets do they have in the network, what are the roles, who communicating with who, and so on. And once we do that and they see the value, they start also introducing it to the operational people, and then they understand there is more value than just the cybersecurity part. There's also the operational value over there. But for that, it requires quite good communication between the operational departments and the cybersecurity departments, and also, but I see it's something that happens in the, let's say, the smart CISOs that we see quite a lot over mostly the past 2 years, that are more aware of OT, and I believe that we have some of them also here. We see that they understand more and more the capabilities of technological and the technological benefits of cybersecurity solutions, and they also know how to pitch it to the operational people properly. So they will have this mix and match, and it will bring also operational value, not just tick boxes from cybersecurity perspective. And that's a good pitch because it's easier to get a consensus within the organization if you're actually able to do so.
Okay, John, do you want to comment on this one?
Just briefly, I mean, obviously, cyber is a means by which a lot can be accomplished, and there is at least from the things that I read in the industry publications and the people that I talk to, there's a rush to pretty much web enable everything through the IoT, and for a lot of things that's a good idea. But I'm also harking back to reading Stephen Covey, where he says begin with the end in mind, and really starting to think of, okay, yes, we can web enable everything. In just sitting here at my desk, I've got lights and thermostats and 2 iPhones that are all web enabled. Okay? And then we want to web enable rail cars and locomotives and everything associated with them. I think that beginning with the end in mind and looking at it and saying, well, yes, we can do that. And then maybe we need to ask ourselves, well, is that such a great idea to have everything about these pieces of rolling stock and infrastructure accessible to anybody with a web connection? And if so, how are you going to secure that? So I mean, on the physical side of it, we called it crime prevention through environmental design. And I think that when you start setting up these networks and these web-enabled things, it's obviously a good idea to take a look at it from a threat perspective and say, okay, what happens if knuckleheads get access to this particular system? Can they just turn off the lights, or can they do something more nefarious with it? And it's a threat evaluation that needs to be done with all these systems that we are in a rush to make available to most everybody.
Okay. So I've gone a little bit off topic here on the bullet points, but I often find that that's probably the best way to go anyway. But another thing that's come up here is security by design, and of course this is a maturity discussion, right? And I know that the engineering, procurement, and contractor phase is also something that we've looked at in the past with major infrastructure projects in the transport sector here in Europe. That cybersecurity is usually a secondary element to those particular contracts. They start building large transport facilities, and then they're hiring in the cyber guys. So are we getting any better at security by design? Can we comment on that? And Mickey, over to you.
Yes. So I think the short answer is yes. We see that all the railway manufacturers in the market, they start considering security within their designs, and it comes because of cybersecurity requirements originated in the customers, probably originated also in the regulators. So we see this network effect in which all the different pieces in the chain are there to promote security, and then it starts quite early. We see it also starts as early as the development of the safety system. So currently in many of the countries, you cannot actually get a safety license or safety approvals without cybersecurity case. So you need to include it within it. And I'm sure that this trend happens more and more. It's not like even 5 years ago or 4 years ago, rail companies wouldn't talk much about cybersecurity in their operational systems. Today, the situation has completely changed. Today, I don't think there are rail companies that are not considering cybersecurity solutions, also in the OT. I think that it's also part of the design. Nevertheless, there are some challenges. One of the challenges is that railways are kind of future-proof solutions. So when you buy a train, you expect it to operate for 30 years or so. And in cybersecurity, it's not the case. Let's think 30 years before now, what did we know about cybersecurity? How many malwares did we know about, and what were the level of sophistication? Even 5 years ago, if we look back 5 years ago, we would see attacks which are far less sophisticated than, for instance, the recent attack on SolarWinds. So like every year changes when you talk about cybersecurity, and that's the challenge. So when you build such a security mechanism as part of your security by design, you need to maintain a high level of flexibility and a high level of agility. You need to make sure that you can update it according to the recent security threats, and that's something that every security by design solution or every design that includes security elements should take into account.
Kyle, thank you, Mickey. Kyle, can you comment on this?
Yeah, so I came into transit in this role as CISO about 2.5 years ago, and I can say one of the things that became apparent to me right away is we are in the middle of our technology and then by necessity our cybersecurity revolution in this particular industry. And so what I'm seeing right now when I look at the vendor side of the house, meaning the kinds of solutions that we're getting pitched and being proposed, I would say about a third of the time there's a true appreciation for, right, and I try to be realistic with everyone, so but I think about a third of the time there's a true appreciation for the complexities of an integrated IT and OT, ICS, SCADA, and business network environment. And the other 2/3 of the time, they're still pitching the old solutions that work for the midpoint company that doesn't have that. And you ask specific questions about things like, all right, that's a great service, but what happens if you don't have internet connectivity because this is an off-network device or it's only on, partially on the network, and then, this reliant on cloud to be able to come back and interpret the type of malware or the type of incident is not practical in a lot of OT environments and SCADA environments, right? It doesn't have that kind of access point. And so I find that it's not difficult to stump the vendors right now when you introduce something unique about your environment. That being said, I've seen a lot of progress over the last 2 years. Specifically in the last year, I would say I think a lot of people, it's starting to resonate with a lot of folks that because we're not the only ones. It's not just rail. There's a lot of folks running OT that have these still air-gapped components of their environment that are starting to get more connectivity, and that's certainly a big part of it. That's certainly where the risk is being introduced. So when I look at, I think the first part of what underlying question is the relationship with our vendors and our partners. The ones specifically manufacturing rail products. We're introducing a lot of requirements on them right now, and I think that they're coming back with a lot of good questions. And that's why, again, I think they're also adapting right now in the middle of this. They're realizing that, cybersecurity really wasn't a concern for them probably about 5 years ago or even less. And now the demands are much higher, and a lot's happened in that time frame. We've got a lot more in the United States, a lot more congressional inquiry and legislation starting to appear for the first time this year regarding cybersecurity requirements in transit, particularly in surface transportation like us. And so all of these things I think are influencing, again, we're watching it happen live right now. And it's another good reason why I hope a lot of folks listen to these kinds of discussions, because I think we can move a little faster because the technology does exist. The capability exists out there in the environment. We haven't applied it yet to a lot of what we're buying and building in transit.
Thank you, Kyle. Franco, what's your thought?
Yeah, I let's say I agree with what's been said, and a couple of actually practical things that we help with organizations is actually we have an assessment which is more specific, let's say, to the OT environment. It's called, the name is kind of interesting, it's called Vader. So basically where we review the architecture organization, mostly from an OT side, because as Kyle was saying, that's where you expect to see your air gaps, even though sometimes it's just on paper and they're not really air gap systems, but that's a different story. And something else actually that we are involved with, in terms of assessment is called EDM, or external dependency, which goes back to the supply chain, right? So basically, what we're trying to do with that is help organization mature in a sense of understanding what is needed, even from a sustainment and protection requirement. So making sure that security discussion, it's actually considered, especially when it comes to your supply chain. So, for example, if you have a contract, and oftentimes I use this example just because it's probably simple for everybody to follow through, and that is, I was talking one time with an organization that were using a cloud-based, solution. So when I asked the question about, who would be, let's say, on point, for in an incident or whatever, the partner I was working with was kind of pointing to the vendor saying, it's cloud-based, so they take care of it. And of course, the vendor was like, oh, no, not really, right? So bottom line is that, sometimes we are missing also, as you were saying before, there's still that separation. Procurement goes its own ways, and security is not always, part of. So we try by, these actually particular type of service or assessment that we provide is helping organization understanding, what kind of language is needed. So let's say helping fill in, those gaps that we talk about. So those are, let's say, two practical aspects of things that we can help in doing. But I certainly agree with Kyle also when he was talking about legislators are now a little more concerned, and also, not too long ago, probably a couple of years ago, in the DC area, there was also a working group kind of started, some conversations also in relation to, purchasing red cars and all that, right? So your suppliers now can be from nations that are not necessarily in good terms with us, and therefore that, of course, brings up all sorts of other implications. So, altogether, I guess, it's there is definitely a better understanding. So people in general, are more interested and working towards that direction. Are we there yet? Probably not. It's not going to be overnight, I guess. It's going to take some time, but definitely I'm starting seeing some movements there, and that's good news.
Thank you. John, do you want to comment on this?
Just one brief comment is we do a lot, and justifiably so, of strengthening networks and hardening networks and implementing countermeasures, and this is altogether fitting and proper. You do as much of the preventative stuff as you can. But one of the things I'd like to just highlight here is the importance of sharing information on attacks and breaches and stuff and stuff like that as it comes across. And I again defer to Franco and his Genius Bar people over there at CISA, with what we call the in-kick and other places that have the cybersecurity expertise, so that, let's face it, eventually every operator or every company with a public-facing presence is going to get attacked by something. And the important thing is that information be shared with the proper authorities, so that the threat and attack vector are understood and known, so that countermeasures can be developed. There isn't a Maginot line here that we can hide behind. And so when attacks happen and are brought forth, it's important to share that information with the people who can, with the appropriate authorities that can help you with countermeasures, and more importantly, maybe your organization suffered a breach, but the information gleaned from that will help somebody else. So there are resources out there that deal with this, and I would highly recommend that anyone who suffers that type of breach contact the appropriate people, so that we can work together to counter it. That's really what I wanted to add there, James.
Thank you. A few comments have come in. NS Rail in the Netherlands have asked a question, and they're Says, I'm wondering if the panelists have an opinion on how mature a rail organization would need to be to really say they are in control of their cyber risk. Kyle.
So if we look at, so there's some common scales. Most people use a 1 to 5 kind of scale when they talk about maturity, right? 1 being you're very basic or have very little in that area. 5 being you're what they call optimized. What I would point to, I think the safe sweet spot is when we talk about maturity, is that 3 range right now. I think is a healthy place for us to target. And that's not to say that we shouldn't be looking at getting to a 4, but when you talk about the resources necessary to do advanced metrics and tracking and the things that are necessary to hit a 4, I'm not seeing that right now. Now, again, ideal kind of target. But I think the reason why I hit on a 3 is it means that you have policy in place, which is really important for an organization to be able to say, look, I understand cyber risk. I'm following a particular framework, whatever framework it is that you choose. Of course, in the States here, and especially on the government side, NIST framework is very robust, and they have specific special publications that deal with industrial control systems as well. That you have the right staff in place, right? There's no way you're going to get to a 3 maturity level if you've got 3 to 4, maybe 5 people on staff doing cybersecurity. It's impossible. And it doesn't have to do, cyber is one of those things. There's just so much. Yeah, you just to get to a good solid foundation. It requires a fair amount of labor to get there, especially when you're talking about organizations that have invested. When you talk about maturity, one of the things that we're faced with is we've made, if your organization's been around like ours, we were formed and came online in the early 70s. You're talking about decades of technology investment with little or no security investment for most of that, vast majority of that period of investment time. So that means that we're coming out of a hole now. Now, I come into an organization like Metro where we've got to look at where we've invested and how much it's going to cost to go back and secure legacy technology. One of my co-speakers here talked about, rail cars that they are meant to last 10, 20, 30 years. So when you make an investment, something that we bought in the late 90s is still on our tracks right now. And we're going back and trying to layer security on that. And so these are complex things that make it difficult to get to even a 3. So I push 3s, and I talk to my peers, and I talk to our own leadership here at Metro. I talk about a 3 being a really healthy goal that says, yeah, you know what, I feel pretty, doesn't mean we're insulated, doesn't mean we aren't going to have an incident, but it means we will respond very quickly and hopefully recover very quickly because we've invested properly.
Thank you. Mickey, you want to comment?
Yeah, I'll try, although it was a great answer, so I'll try to add some additional thoughts. So first, I think that it's very hard to say something like, I'm really in control of my cyber risks, like indefinitely, okay? So that's something that, like cyber risks are evolving, and same does the solutions and the approach toward them should evolve as well. So that's the basic thing. But apart from that, I agree with the thing that first you need to have a team like dealing with it, and you need to understand what are the roles and responsibilities. What we see is like usually it starts from the governance point of view, and you need to appoint the right team, you need to have the right policies in place, and so on. But it needs to grow from there. Where it grows first to implementing some basic security measures. I think those were fine a few years ago. Today they are not. And you always need to maintain agility and implement more and more things. But I think some nice KPIs to ask yourself is first, like, do I even know what I'm protecting, and do I know what do I currently have in my environment, and can I know if there was a change of in the environment, which can be dynamic? Can I know if I'm currently under attack? If someone attempts to attack me, let's say I have some devices that collect logs about attacks. Do I look at them? Do I know that they exist? Do they even monitor the right things? Same goes also for like all the equipment that is going into the system. Am I adding the right security requirements in place? So these are just like some practical examples. Apart from that, of course, you need to follow a framework, choose a framework, make sure you're continuously improving year by year whether it's the organizational level, whether it's the policy level, whether it's the technological level. You need to practice it from time to time, do penetration testing, continuous risk assessments, and so on. And of course, like, have the right technologies in place and make sure that automation solves you part of the problem, because usually you won't have enough people in your team. So at least you need to have like the right technology that does the thing that you could do with much more people.
Okay, thank you, Mickey. John, do you have any comments on 3 out of 5? Seems to be that's the number to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with Kyle that a 3 would be a great place to look across your organization and say, yeah, we're all at a 3. And I mean, I'm also aware that we are marrying the 21st century technology, especially in the rail sector, and in some aspects the transit sector, with infrastructure that has been in place for 150 years. I mean, Kyle's got transit locations that, yeah, WMATA has been around since, what do you say, Kyle, 1970 something or other. But he's running right next to CSX tracks that have been there since before the United States Civil War. And one of the things that I found in what I do, I'm over training and exercises, and so we have a program called the Intermodal Security Training and Exercise Program that brings together people in tabletop exercises, that brings in all the people who have concurrent operations next to each other. So we'd bring in Kyle with WMATA, we'd bring in the CSX rail people, and all the other municipalities and the jurisdictions that are in there, and bring them in for a security exercise, so people understand exactly what's running next to the operations that they're trying to secure. For example, bridges over the Mississippi, over major bridges, rail bridges in the United States. You may have them as a freight railroad. You might run passenger railroad over them as well. But then you also have telecommunications and probably some pipelines that run over them as well, because they make the best use of what infrastructure is available. So it's all interoperable and all interwoven into one in the same places, is what I'm trying to tell you. Okay. And cyber factors into every single organization that is running every single one of those operations.
Okay, we've got 3 minutes left. Franco, can you comment quickly?
Yeah, I will try to be quick. And actually, I like the quantitative value, let's say, assigned, and one assessment that we perform. Actually, it's for the maturity of organizations. So, and I wish I could say that most organizations are level 3, but the reality is most organizations actually strive for level 1. So that's the truth, I guess. For the person from the Netherlands also that was asking, but I should agree with all that was said. Something else that I let's say I advocate for is, first of all, you need to understand what you have to protect, right? That's your basics, if you will. But also my usually motto, if you will, is don't store if you don't need it. So basically the point is, try to apply what is relevant, try to do what is sensible, try to do what is necessary, and not try to come out with all these new things and stuff that will introduce, let's say, more complexity. So I guess I come from old school, so I'm more for less complex things, so let's try to keep it simple and more easier to manage. So, but that 3 value, I guess, it helps understanding that maturity of organization is probably a good starting point.
Super. Thank you very much. Okay, that's it for the Cyber Maturity panel. I'd like to thank Franco Cappa, Kyle Melo, Mickey Schiffman, and Jonathan Lamb for joining us today on this discussion. I think it was quite healthy, and I think 3 out of 5 is a good bar to try to reach. Thank you, Kyle. Our next presentation is going to be cybersecurity landscape in rail. That will be on the main stage in 5 minutes with Kyle Malo. So please, we'll meet you back in 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, team.
Thank you.
Thank you.